Hey, I'm Seth Hawkins. Welcome to the CedTalks Podcast. My guest today is a candidate for State Attorney right here in Calvert County, Maryland. He's a lawyer, leader of his trade, and I'm proud to have him on the show today. Right now, here is Mr. Rick Piereck. Mr. Piereck, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sed.
Yes, sir, and thank you for, taking time out of your day to sit here and want to speak with me. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Right off the bat, I got to ask you, man, how are you feeling? I know that's a question we all sort of ask each other, when we pass by each other. But when you really sit down and think about it, mentally, physically, spiritually, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. We got into this campaign for state's attorney, and everything is going real well. We are having a lot of communication with folks in the community, and we're just everything's just really going well right now.
That's good. What really made you get into wanting to run for state attorney? Because I know you have your own law practice that you've done. You do a lot of other job titles as well. Right. But what really made you want to run and do something like this?
Right. So state's attorney, a lot of people confuse what the state's attorney's job is. So it may be important to get into that first. Is the state's attorney, right, is the top law enforcement official of the county, right? This is the person that will prosecute try to do justice in our criminal law, in our criminal courts here in Calvert County, not the Attorney General. So this is a county position, right? So as a former prosecutor, I just saw some things going on that I didn't necessarily agree with. I represented some victims of domestic violence that weren't being believed, their cases weren't being prosecuted appropriately. Or to the fullest extent, and they were very scared, and many of them were thinking of leaving Calvert County, and that to me was a travesty. And so, as with anything that I've ever done, right, I do it because I think I can make a positive impact here to the community, and so that's what we're looking to do, is get into the courthouse and make things a little fairer for everyone, and I think with that we'll have better outcomes for our community.
Yeah, that's incredible. You see an issue, you see a problem, and you're willing to, not only use your voice to stick up what's right in your opinion, but to also stick up for other people that are going through some difficult situations. I think that's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I was when I was in high school, I joined the Army, and I did that for about 9 years. And in the Army, we learned we can either complain about things or we can do something about them, right? Those are really the two options, and I love complaining. So since I want to keep complaining about things, I also want to do something about it, right? And so, we get in here and we're going to make some changes.
Yeah, I think by nature also we're complainers. I know complaining has such a negative connotation to it, but, we see a lot of things that are going on in the world, and we want to do something about it. Current events in the world, like the abortion thing going on. Not to get, my feelings or my take on it, but it's like if you feel like something is wrong, then you should, stand up for what you believe in and, make a change, do something about it instead of, sitting around. My grandfather always tells me, you can't make any changes by sitting on the couch or by, laying in bed. You have to get up and, do something about it if you feel like something is right. So I think that's empowering.
Right, and Sed, I know you're a man of faith, and I'm a man of faith, and if we read back to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and you see his life, right, he taught, and one could say that he was at points complaining about the system and how things were working, but he didn't just stop there, right? He also had faith and actions, right? And I think that's what we need to do. We need to both, have a strongly held point of view, but then we got to go back and take the steps and fight that fight so that we can keep progressing things in a way that's positive, not only just for us, but our children, the community at large, and those, frankly, who don't have, a voice, the folks that can't come up to the courthouse and make sure that, their loved ones being treated fairly, where they're victims of crimes, and they, that their case is being fully litigated at the courthouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I look back to my time in high school, and I don't know, I feel like I didn't really have a voice, or I wasn't as encouraged to speak up. I think the teachers and administration, they wanted us students to do that, but I feel like there wasn't really a platform for us to do that. It wasn't until I really got to college where professors were sort of advocating for us to sort of stick up for the things that we felt were wrong. I know there's been times where, I felt like I was being judged or being mistreated in the classroom, and I had to send an email or speak to a professor one-on-one and just say, hey, I didn't like how you came across in this moment. What can we do to, to fix it? In your opinion, What do you think young people like myself should do to really empower themselves and stick up for what they feel is right if they feel like something's wrong?
Right. So, I mean, I think the first thing is educating yourself, right? Oftentimes, we see something that we disagree with, and, we jump to outrage. And outrage is an important step on things, but also, we need to educate ourselves. So when you have those conversations, you're coming from a point where you're educated. The person that you're coming to will realize that, right? Couple other things that I think are important is that we are mindful of being respectful to others. When we're bringing up something we don't like. And then the other thing that I'm really big on is presuming good intent in others, right? So let's say you're a professor that you think that you were wronged in his or her class, right? I think you presume that they had a good reason for doing that, right? When you're having your conversations, and that's kind of the point from where you start those conversations, because then you don't start from a place of animosity. It's a place of there's a problem here that needs to be fixed, right? So now when I walk into court and I got an attorney that's representing somebody else with an opposing point of view, and I'm walking in there, I'm not walking in there with the mindset that person is a bad person, right? That person is dumb or any of those sort of negatives, right? I'm always presuming that they're a good, smart, intelligent person that just happens to see the problem from another point of view. And I think when you started looking at issues from that point of view, you're able to come to collaborative resolutions to matters that maybe even seem insolvable or unsolvable.
Yeah, I agree. You got to have that rational mind, and not just a rational mind, but almost like a peace of mind as well. Because when you're going in with rage and then the other person is filled with rage, you're just two bulls going at one another, and it's just oil and grease. Doesn't mesh well together, and the whole thing is just blown up, and nothing comes to terms. Nothing is getting situated, done about it. So I think that was a really good point. Just have a peace of mind when you're, going about those things.
Right, and then also sometimes you got to give the other party, right, a chance to come to terms. They may have been. It's very hard for us as humans to realize that A, we're wrong, right, but B, that to be able to admit that to another person. So I think when you bring that sort of attitude towards these sorts of conversations, I think you're more likely to get a positive outcome where you may agree with someone in an outcome.
Yeah, and we're not always right, too, also.
Right.
It's like sometimes we feel like we are right, but like not all the time we're right about certain things. So that's why I always try to, tell my family also, think of other people's perspectives. Yeah, it's easy to, bash on them because they view this or they feel like the world is like this, but try to view things from their perspective. If you can't come to an understanding, respect them, but let it go, because you have your own life you got to focus on.
Right. And, for most things, you're absolutely right. There are those things that, unfortunately, in this world, right, we gotta keep fighting for, right? And sometimes it means that you got to take it to another level as well, right? And be prepared to do that. But like I said, I think if you approach issues with respect, both for the person, for their argument, right, and all those things, and if they're an immovable object, sometimes you just got to find where is the movable object, right? It may be their supervisor or their, the Court of Appeals or wherever you're looking at. Sometimes there are other avenues as well. You just got to work your way up the food line.
Yeah, you did mention earlier that you are a man of faith. I think this may tie into me asking you about your early life
Sure.
and what life was like for you in Florida, but where does your faith come from? Was it from you as a child growing up? Did it come later on in your adult years? Where did you get your faith and your belief in the Lord from?
Right. So my parents weren't super religious when I was growing up. We were, my dad became more religious as I was maybe a tween, that I went off and joined the Army. And that's really where I met some folks and I did some studying. And I believe that every good Christian should read and know the Bible for themselves, right? They shouldn't believe what anybody really tells them. They should know it for themselves, right? So that is when I undertook studies and whatnot. And that's kind of where the foundation of my beliefs are from, right? Is from that period when I just joined the Army a few years into my military career.
Nice. I learned that lesson, I think, in college, where I couldn't really rely on other people's interpretation of the Bible or their faith to help, get me by through life. Because whether it was through my pastor or my grandparents or my mom and how, they believed, I had to have my own interpretation of it. So it wasn't until I started reading scripture on my own last year, doing Bible studies and everything, that I really started to form that understanding of, okay, this is why we read scripture. This is why we pray daily. This is why, we involve the Lord in everything that we do. It's because we have to save ourselves and we have to live this life, but it gets easier and it's manageable when we walk with Him. So once I started reading those scriptures for myself, it was just like the light bulb went off. And it's like everything that everybody's been trying to teach me all my life, now it's like making sense.
Right. Yeah. And with a lot of things, the Bible is a book that is so broad, in its application that, if you go into the Bible looking for something, you can probably find an out of context passage, or so to justify whatever, right or wrong, whatever it is you want to find in there, right? So, but the point is context, right? Is making sure that those passages aren't taken out of context, and that's what I see happening all the time, right? Is that folks that seek to misuse a word, right, will then pick and choose and cherry pick passages that appear to say something, but then when you go back and look at it in the scope of the book and chapter and what's going on in that point of the story, right, doesn't fit in with the narrative, right, oftentimes that folks are trying to apply the Bible to.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they try to take what God's saying, try to kind of turn it to like a worldly view or like an earthly view of how things are done in this world, but not pertaining to how God sees things and eternal life.
Right, exactly.
What's your favorite book in the Bible, if you have one?
I don't know that I have a favorite. The Gospels are always obviously are fascinating, but I was fascinated by the story of Job. Mm-hmm. And just kind of being able to be that guy that has all that faith despite like every single bad thing happening to you, right? And I often think about that when we go through those periods of our lives where it seems like everything, the cards are all stacked against you, that you just take an L after L, mm-hmm. And but you see that if you keep the faith and you keep trucking forward, that God will see you through, and that to me has always resonated, and I always try to keep it kind of in the back of my mind.
I've always been a fan of King David and his story in the Bible, mm-hmm. just because he was God's chosen one when nobody really saw him. And he was the man after God's own heart. And even though he made all of these mistakes and he messed up and slipped up, so many times, even when he was anointed, he still went after God. Even when he ran away and was hiding, God still had his favor and he still chased after God's own heart through all the things that, he was tacked up against and what he put himself through. God still loved him enough to, help him out in life. And so I always found myself just loving that story, kind of going back and reading, through the book of Psalms and David's prayers and everything, because it seems like we're all alone and we're just crying out for God's name, and he's right there.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it sometimes we got to have, combining those two, right? And sometimes we got to have enough faith in ourselves like God has in us, right? And I think he has a lot more faith in us and our abilities than sometimes we have in our own abilities.
Yeah. How important is it to make mistakes as an individual as you're going through life? With me, I'm in my final stage of college. I feel like sometimes I do it right. Sometimes I don't do it right. I slip up. I make mistakes. I get hard on myself. But I know those mistakes are crucial because it helps you grow and it strengthens your character. So with everything that you've done in your life, how have you learned from some of the mistakes you've made?
Right. I think mistakes are everything. I mean, I think they're the game, right? I mean, you see, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. I mean, these guys were guys who were taking thousands of free 3-point or free throw shots, often missing many of them, right? Why is that? Because they knew that with the practice and the reps, right, they were going to get better. And it's just like that with everything else, right? Every time I walk into court, win, lose, or draw, right, I learn something, right? I get a little better. Every time I have an interaction with folks, I get a little better, right? And so I think in life sometimes we beat ourselves up so much in our mistakes when really the mistakes are kind of what form that's the way potential comes out, right? We all forget, having small children at home. You see that they will struggle to walk, and how hard standing up and walking and picking up things with your hands, like all these things that we all take for granted, how difficult that is, and how many times the kids fail before they're able to do those things. But then it becomes effortless, right? And that's the same thing with anything that we do. You gotta crawl before you walk, before you run, right? And so we just sometimes we gotta not beat ourselves up so much about our failures. In the Army, we talk about doing after action reviews whenever you did something, right? And I think that's a great practice that more people should adopt. What does that mean, right? You do something, afterwards you look back, you see what I did right, what I did wrong, what can I improve on, and just we gotta learn to take lessons out of our misses, out of our losses.
Right. It's all about sort of looking back and reflecting on what did I do right, what did I do wrong, what am I able to gather from this, and what can I do next time. It doesn't matter how many times you fall down, it just matters how many times you sort of get back up. Like, you look at this basketball season, for example, who would have thought the Warriors, with the season they were doing in the beginning, that they would go all the way to the finals and win the whole thing? I mean, the past 2 or 3 years or so played with injuries and whatnot. Like, it was a rough time, but they were able to bounce back. And, of course, I'm mad that they won the season. I don't like the Warriors that much. But at the end of the day, I respect Steph Curry and his work ethic and, what he does.
Right. No, absolutely. And they certainly got a lot of help from the referees in the Boston Miami series, where my beloved Miami Heat were eliminated. But yeah, from that example, right? Like, if you're a Boston Celtics player or Miami Heat or any of the other teams that got eliminated, right? Like, you sitting around moping after losing it all doesn't really help you, right? Like, what do? You go, you see, where were my weaknesses, right? I'm going to strengthen those parts. Where were my strengths? We're going to keep those, we're going to get better at those things. And that's what I think we got to do continuously, as we move forward, whether it's in education, whether it's in the law, whether, whatever it is that you're doing. So like part of our campaign plank here for state's attorneys, that we want to improve communication and training with our local law enforcement officers, right? Because I want, when members of the community, are having encounters with law enforcement, that those encounters are lawful. And I think our officers want that, want those encounters to be lawful, right? They want to do the right thing. And oftentimes you just got to have these communications, right? And so from a state's attorney's perspective, we can have these conversations on an ongoing basis with them, right? And just make sure that we're all doing a much better job. Right, from the time that you come into contact with a police officer to, God forbid, the time that you're in court with one of my prosecutors, right? We want to make sure that your rights are upheld throughout that.
Right. Yeah. I got a funny analogy I got to make before we move on.
Sure.
Talk about your early life. My friend sent me this meme back in May, and it was like, every time Kendrick Lamar drops an album, the Warriors win the championship. 2015, 2017, 2018. I was like, you know what? I think you have a point. So when people at work started asking me, who do you think's going to win the finals? I was like, the Warriors. And here's why. Every time Kendrick Lamar drops an album, they win. I showed a picture. I said, look, the numbers don't lie. I don't want them to win, but these guys are going to win. And they ended up winning, and then Kendrick Lamar dropped the album this year.
Oh, no.
So it's his fault why they won.
So bottom line is he should not drop a new album next year. He needs to stop.
He can't drop any albums at all. No more. But shifting gears from that, you didn't grow up in Maryland. You grew up in Florida. What was life like for you there growing up?
Very hot. Florida was very hot. My dad was an entrepreneur, and so life was all about the hustle, and I use that word in the most positive way possible, right? I mean, my dad was somebody who really always instilled in us, hard work and dedication to whatever it is that you're doing. He was a God-fearing man. His church was very important to him, and that's the other part where I was giving back. Right, was really important. My dad before he passed, he had supported this clinic in Malawi so much that after his passing, they named it after him. It's a Piereck Clinic. It's for orphans in Malawi. So giving back, being or striving to be good or in whatever you're doing was important to us. And so that was that. But we had a great life. I mean, especially now as defense attorney and prior as a prosecutor. I've seen some kids that really had, like a terrible go in life. They didn't have parents that loved them. They struggled for food, struggled for housing. We had all of that, right? And so I couldn't have been more blessed.
Yeah. With your dad being entrepreneur, having his own small business, of course, you opening up your own law practice, do you think that ties into anything with him being an entrepreneur, you yourself wanting to establish, your own thing? Do you think that ties in together?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I saw that it could be done, right? And how that gave you some freedom, right, to kind of do and pursue the things that you thought were appropriate. But the biggest thing is having faith, just having the faith in yourself, right? And knowing that, if I've, my dad had many businesses that didn't work out, right? Until he had one that did, right? And so, understanding that, we're not, when you take these sorts of leaps, you're not doing the rest of your life. You're just kind of doing the next thing, right? And that may not be the last thing. There may be things after that. And that's all okay, but not to be afraid to take the shot.
Yeah, right. My great-grandfather, he was the pastor of his own church, and my grandfather has his own roofing company. Mm-hmm. And I think I was taking a business class, and I was asking him, like, how'd you start your business? And he was like, well, I was laying, concrete, and then one day I just decided, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of working for somebody. I want something of my own. So he looked at his bank account, look at how much he had saved up, and he said, I'm starting my own roofing company, and if it flops, it flops. But if I make it, I make it. And he's been doing that for over 30 years now. So just the fact that, him starting his own business as a black man and being able to be consistent with that, it definitely inspires me with, whatever I choose to do in life. The sky's the limit to what I can do and set my mind to. So that stuff is, inspiring. Yeah,
absolutely. And, sometimes you got to take that check. 'Cause otherwise, right, when you work for someone else, you got to play by their rules, right? It's like that thing that parents always say, right? You live under my roof, you live under my rules. Mm-hmm. And there's some of that goes on in business too. Actually, wherever you work, right, where you got to follow your boss's rules. Well, for me, there's certain kinds of cases I don't like taking, so I just don't take them here. I got a choice, working for myself of who we choose to represent, who we don't. Sometimes we'll take cases for free, to help folks out. And I can do that because, this is an enterprise that I answer to me, right? And that's that sort of freedom is really hard for you to find when you're working for someone else, right? And you have the ability to just go out and do well. And there are other things, right? I'm on the housing authority here, so folks having a roof over their head is important to me. And that's something if I was working for someone else, who knows if I'd have the time, be given the time to go, do all the things that I have to do with that or other nonprofits or whatnot that we're involved in. So, working for yourself also gives you flexibility. On the other hand, excellence is necessary, right? Because your name is tied to this business, right? So if this law office starts not giving out great results, right, my name takes a hit too. So it's very, very important that things here in this office be done correctly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I love the Rocky movies. I got into that during the pandemic, and I watched them here and there, but I always liked Rocky 6, where he was talking to his son and it was sort of like empowering him and encouraging him. And he was just like, if you know what you're worth, go out and get it, like don't let anybody tell you you can't do it, or don't, blame anybody else. And I don't know, I've always been replaying that in the back of my mind for like the last year or so, because it's like, at the end of the day, I know what I'm worth. God knows what I'm worth because he's the one who created me. He has a plan laid out for me that I can't see. He's revealing that to me as, time goes on. But, if you know what you're worth and you're confident in your abilities, it's just like, go out and take it. Go out and get what you want. Right.
No, I agree. And I'm not a big believer in super long-term plans, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in hazy long-term plans, but like really solid short-term plans and malleable medium-term plans, right? So, I want to know where my next step is, I want to know the direction I'm moving in is my medium-term plan, and then I kind of generally know what I want to do, where the destination is, right? But I think sometimes people either get too fixed on the short-term or the long-term, and they forget that medium term, right? Which is kind of what you're going to do in the next 3 to 5 years. Where are you going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? I think is a really important question. And I think people, get lost on their, who am I going to be? Who's said in 20 years? Or who's said right now? And we're not going to think about anything else. Right, I think both of those are very dangerous, right? And so you gotta kind of take it all into account so that you keep moving in the positive direction. Because what I see a lot, especially with the young folks, is young folks, instead of progressing right in their careers, as they're moving laterally, right, where they're just kind of staying in the same place and just kind of jogging in place as opposed to moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's tough because like you see that vision that you want for yourself, whereas like, let's say, within 5 years, I'm going to have my own apartment or have my own house and I'm going to be doing this and doing that. And it's like, okay, but what steps are you going to take to get to that moment? What's going to happen, like you said, in that middle portion? Right. Because it's like, yeah, here I am right here. This is where, I would like to be in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. But it's like, what kind of steps are you taking to get to that point? And I think that's where it's important to be in the present, be grateful with where you're at and what you're doing, but also, have that idea of what am I going to do in like a month or two, right. Where would I like to be in this short time span?
Right. No, I agree. The here and now is important. You just can't get caught up in the here and now isn't everything, right? Yeah. So if you're, and for a number of things, right? Work, the work that you're doing right this second, it doesn't necessarily need to be what you're doing forever. The mental state you're in, you got to understand that in life is full of hills and valleys, and sometimes you're in a valley for a little while, but understand you're going to get to the hill eventually, right? And so we just got to keep moving. So long as you just keep moving ahead towards those medium and long term goals, it's important, right, that you're doing those things.
Yeah, there's a book about that, Peaks and Valleys. I don't remember who the author is, but I read that last year. And it's a guy, and he's trying to get to this peak of the mountaintop, but he finds himself in the valley, and it's hard for him to, find his way out of it. And sometimes he reaches the peak, but he sees a higher peak, and he's like, oh, I want to get to that one. And now he's stuck in the valley even longer, and he has to learn to be content with the peak that he gets to and understand that, even though you're at the peak, you're going to be at the valley, but there are ways to quickly find your way out of that and not get settled into it. I got to look that up again. That was a really good book. I really did like it, but I learned a lot from it because, in life you will have peaks and valleys. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're at the bottom, and sometimes you're just sort of, at the middle. And it's important to sort of differentiate between them and know that you will be at that peak again. You just have to take your time, and it's all in keeping God close,
Absolutely. And it's, I always often tell my kids, and I'm not sure they fully understand it, but in science we learn about this idea of inertia, right? This power that keeps still objects still and move, and then momentum being the power that keeps objects that are moving, right? And inertia being one of the strongest forces in our universe, right? So that's why when getting out to the gym is probably harder than being in the gym, because once you're in a gym, you're moving. And I see that with a lot of these organizations that I'm a part of, whether it be here at my law firm, at the housing authority, at these nonprofits I'm involved in, is that even the campaign, is that oftentimes, we want to do things the perfect way, but we don't want to move until things are perfect, right? And so you have this inertia that's working against you, and you're not moving. And oftentimes I find that let's just get moving. Take whatever the little steps are, right? So if you're, getting back to the hills and valleys, right? If you're in one of those periods where you're in a lull and it's hard to get out of bed in the morning, right? Just focus on that next step, right? Get out of bed, take a shower, you go to the gym, take the little baby steps, and then eventually once you get enough momentum, then you'll be able to kind of start going back up the mountain. But you got to understand that like once you stop, I did a race, and one of my kids was with me, and getting very tired. We did a 5K, getting very tired and wanted to stop. And I said, listen, we don't stop, because once you stop, it's going to be very hard for us to finish this. And we were able to finish. She ended up medaling in the race. So it was great. But, just understanding that like sometimes we want to stop, and that's our nature as humans, but stopping can also be a very dangerous thing.
Yeah. Well, my dad suddenly passed away 2 years ago. I remember. Thank you. I remember just not. I didn't want to do anything. It was just it was so sudden. But everybody was encouraging me to just keep going, just keep going to school, keep going to work. Decrease the hours, or decrease the classes that you're doing, but just keep going. And I didn't understand it at the time, because it's just like, I just want to just sit and kind of like reflect on this. But I thank those people for like encouraging me to keep going, because if I had stopped and not done anything, it would have been much harder to find that motivation to get back and, go to school or go to work and even do the podcast. I still did the podcast even weeks after that happened, but I was so glad that I kept up with that momentum. And it'll be 2 years in September, but it's like now everything makes sense,
right,
when it comes to, continuing to press forward, with your grief, or just with anything in life too. No matter how difficult or hard it is, if you just keep taking those baby steps, it gets, manageable.
Right. No, absolutely. And the problem is that had you stopped, right, for you to get going again would have been incredibly difficult, right? And I know, because I lost my dad, it was 2015. So what are we talking about here? Like 7-8 years ago or thereabouts. And I still feel like it was yesterday, right? And I certainly could see where, had I stopped at that point, that would have been it for me, right? Because it's very hard to get going after something like that. So, and whatever it is, right? And it may be, getting cut from the bat. I mean, look at Michael Jordan, right? Got cut from the middle school basketball team, right? He could have quit right there, right? But he chose to keep moving, and that's sometimes what you got to do. You just gotta kind of take your lumps, but keep moving, whatever the little step is, right? It doesn't have to be a huge step, but just don't fall into inertia. Don't stop all the way. Just keep chugging along.
Right. Yeah. Shifting gears from that, you're in high school, and I want to know, what made you choose the Army as opposed to doing law school first? What made you choose that route? Right.
So So my dad was, like I said, he's an entrepreneur, and when I was 15, he sat us down and said, listen, son, a couple things. First is you must go to college. Back then, folks didn't really talk about trade school like they do now. I mean, I don't know that I knew that trade school is an option, but, so my dad sat down and said, listen, first thing is you need to go to college. Second thing, I can't pay for it. You got to figure out how to pay for it. So I was 15 years old, and I had to go figure it out. And one day, an Army recruiter called for my older brother, and I happened to pick up the phone, and the rest was history, right? I joined the Army. I loved my time in the Army, and it certainly, I think shaped the sort of person that I am. Funny enough is that I did have a friend of mine who went to high school with me that I talked into going into Army kind of around the same time in high school, and she's still in now as a command sergeant major. So she's like one of the highest enlisted ranks that you can get to in the Army. So I'm very proud of my service.
Nice. Yeah, that's incredible. I know with me in high school, I mean, when I was in high school, it was like 2014. So by then, everybody knows your options are college, Army, or go to a trade school and learn a trade.
Right.
I think college was always destined for me. It was always set up for me by my family. But I think they would have supported me with whatever. But I knew I wasn't going to really do the Army. I don't think I was going to be cut out for that or made for that. And I don't know. I've always loved learning and being in the classroom and doing stuff like that. So college was always, in the plan for me. I just never really knew what I wanted to major in or what I really wanted to do because it always changed.
Right. So, I had a different older brother who joined the Army and was in. And so I knew that if he could do it, I could certainly do it.
Yeah.
So I don't think I think if he hadn't gone in ahead of me, that I don't know that I would have gone in. But having that experience really helped. But I'll tell you, when I joined the Army, I wanted to become a doctor. I mean, that was my goal back then, is to go to medical school. And so I joined the Army. I went into the medical corps. And what I found was that, like, hospital culture was just not one that I liked. I found people didn't treat each other right. They had this, like, rigid hierarchy, and, like, everyone kind of treated the person below them poorly. And I just wasn't into all that, right? And so that's what I talk about. Don't get, like, so married to your long-term goals that you're not willing to abandon them. So when I figured that out, then I kind of reorganize and try to see where I fit in, right? And then that's when I figured out I want to go to law school instead. And so I adjusted fire, and I went to law school. I wanted to be a mergers and acquisitions attorney, so I left the Army and went into law school. And my first semester in law school, the place that I had left in the Army was a Soldier Readiness Processing Center. This is where they process soldiers to go fight the war, because we were fighting a war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there was a terrorist attack there. There was a Major Hassan was an army major that went in with all these guns and shot up, killed a bunch of folks at my workplace. And so that really kind of outraged me, and that's what kind of started me on this path to kind of pursue, more litigation, criminal law, that sort of thing, become a prosecutor. That's kind of where that came from, right? Is that I just saw the injustice. I saw how poorly those victims were being treated, and it's one of these things, right? You can either complain about it or go do something about it, and so I decided to go do something about it, and became first a law clerk down in St. Mary's County, and then came here with Laura Martin and prosecutor here in Calvert County for a number of years.
Nice, gotcha.
Yeah.
So what led you here to Maryland? Because you went from Florida, then you came here to Maryland. What led you here? Was that because of the Army?
Right. So
Okay.
my wife and I met my wife in the Army, and then she got stationed here at Walter Reed, which was in Washington, D.C. at the time. And then I went to law school in D.C. at American University. Mm-hmm. And then I got this clerkship with Judge Michael Stamm down in St. Mary's County. And started going down there. Then I got the job here in Calvert, and for me, Calvert was, like love at first sight. I wasn't born here, but immediately upon kind of driving down Route 4 for that first time, I just knew this was home. This place is just amazing, and so we immediately started looking into moving down here, buying a house, which we ultimately did, and yeah, there's no looking back for us. I mean, this is our place. It's kind of like the same sort of feeling I had when I met my wife for the first time years and years ago, right? It just kind of, I don't know where it came from, but like you just knew that it was right? And that's the same sort of feeling we have here.
Nice. Yeah, I've lived here my whole life, so I feel like I'm a lifer here. If I'm not a lifer here, I'll move into an area that's like this. I don't know. I just like how it's peaceful here, in my opinion. I know some people, they like to be in the city. They like the fast life. Me, I like how slow things are here. It always just relates to me. I know when it came time for me to decide if I wanted to go to college, it was Penn State and Bowie State. That was on my mind, and I knew I didn't want to leave home just because this is what I've always known, and I didn't really have that desire to leave home. Nor did I really felt motivated to leave home. So I just went to CSM and said, how I feel in 2 years. If I'm ready to make that transition, I'll make that transition. But then COVID happened. So I just did my work online at Bowie State. So 2 years later, still doing online work at Bowie State. But yeah.
Well, yeah, and the people here in Calvert. Calvert is beautiful, right? There's no argument, but the people in Calvert too are really special. Several years ago, I had some health stuff going on, and everyone just stepped. Nobody had to be asked. Everyone just kind of stepped up. It was, that's the sort of place I want to raise my kids at, right? Because I don't want to raise my kids to be on their phones all the time or whatever, right? They need to be a part of a community. And Calvert has a thing that, having been in the military, I've been all over, and it's hard to find a place like this where they're people are so connected, and it's just amazing, the sense of community that we have here. And it's something we, as a community, need to treasure and foster, because it's something that we can lose, Yeah. But we do have a great community here, and I'd love to see it flourish.
Yeah, I agree. I have my cousin. He lives in Baltimore. Shout out to my cousin Jonathan. I go see him probably once or twice a month. I go see him and his wife, my niece and nephew. They're my cousins, but I'm Uncle Ced to them. And it's I love being there, but it's every time I get back here and I see those trees, I'm I'm back home. It's nice, it just feels so peaceful to be here, and it's hard to really put into words, but it's just something that I love, and I think I'm going to be a lifer here. If not, then I'm going to an area that's more slow and rural like this.
Well, I was watching one of the debates here during campaign season, and one of the candidates brought up that, when you're driving into the county down Route 4, and it's very true. When you're driving down Route 4 and you're coming back into the county after a long day or a vacation or something, and you pass by that, welcome to Calvert County, God bless you real good, Louis Goldstein quote, you just feel safe. You feel like you're home, and that's a feeling that's I think difficult to replicate. I mean, you can have pieces of it, but just having the whole combination of it in one place is hard to find.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of piece of advice would you give to young people who are still sort of trying to figure out what they want to major in college, or even life after, college, and they get their bachelor's degree? I know with me, I'm coming up on my senior year. I know what I'm going towards, elementary education. Took some time to get there, but I got to figure it out. But what kind of advice would you give to, young people who are sort of, struggling with sort of making that decision or coming to terms with the end of their academic career?
Right. So, having gone through that, and, first thing is that you see that most people in the workplace don't have a job that relates to their field of study, right? So, not all people that study education are going to become teachers, right? Some of them will become bankers. Some of them will become whatever, right? So you're not choosing what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You're just choosing what you're studying for college, right? So just keep that in mind. Generally speaking, I think that, you got to kind of figure out generally where you want to be, career-wise, but not specifically what you're going to be, right? So, I think that you find something that you're going to enjoy learning, right? I think your best returns, right? And when you're looking at college, maybe a younger person who's just getting into college, right? The best return for them is studying something that you're really going to enjoy. You're going to do good at. You're going to be excited to go to your classes. You're going to connect with your teachers. You're going to be involved with the clubs, and you're just really going to be there. If you're going to, during that time that you're a student, really maximize that, right? Go to the football games, go, participate in clubs, be a leader within your community, right? And then, the job stuff and all that's is gonna come later. But if you do really well, right, that's just gonna open up so many doors, right? And then along with that goes don't close any doors, right? I strongly believe that, right? So, somebody offers you an interview for a job you don't think you want, go take the interview, right? Worst case scenario, you're going to get one more experience interviewing, right? But take the advantage of the opportunities that you have to explore, what those things may be, right? For instance, so we had this conversation a few minutes ago where he said, I'm not made for the Army, right? And what I have a nephew now that's, moving up in high school, and he and I had this conversation, right? I'm not telling you to go in the military, but like, go talk to a recruiter, go see, because oftentimes we have these pictures of what, these, different jobs are, different things are. And then we shut out that opportunity completely without going back and trying to suss out what exactly the offering is, right? Because often for the military, right, everyone thinks of like movies when they show you basic training, right, where someone's yelling at you and all this other stuff. Well, that's like 9 weeks, 15 weeks in the beginning, right? Afterwards, it's a job, right? And so, so I think you can apply that to other things in life, right? Just keep your options open, and then once you have all the inputs in, then you make a decision, right? Don't close the doors, early before you really know what all your options are, right? And just make sure you're doing well now in what you're doing, because that's just going to open up many, many more doors, whether you want to go into education or whether later on you figure out, listen, I don't want to do this. I want to go into counseling. I want to go into whatever, right? I want to go to law school, right? So now you got kind of something to use as a trampoline to get into whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I remember before I started at CSM, my family wanted me to do IT or computer science because my aunt and uncle do that. And they're like, you make 6 figures, you make good money with that. Like, you got to go into that. So I was like, okay. And I was speaking with the advisor, and she's outlining the classes that I'm going to have to do. And it's pretty much a majority of math and science. And I'm not good at either of those 2 subjects. And I was just like, I don't want to subject myself to 2 years or 4 years or whatnot, studying all these things I'm just not really interested in. So I said, I'll do arts and science because they didn't have a communications major, which was my second option. But, I did that. I was sort of taking communications classes and I liked it, but got a job working at a daycare here. Loved that. Loved working with the kids. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take some education classes, see if I like that. And the more I learned in those classes and the more I did those observations with other children, I just learned to love it. And I said, you know what? I think this is my niche. I think this is the track that I should go on. And who knows, anything can happen. I definitely want to get my bachelor's, and then who knows? I could do something completely different for my master's. It's like you said, I can't set everything in stone with what I want to do. I wanted to do, psychology for my master's. No, I want to do educational leadership. That might change. I never know, but I have to keep an open mind to the things that are flowing to me or what God is trying to show me, right. And I think that's important.
Well, yeah, and the other thing, now that you mentioned that, is just kind of doing a cost-benefit analysis also, right? Especially when you start talking about, like, post-secondary or postgraduate education, right? I'll give you an example is like social work. I love social workers. Social workers are great people. We need them in this world, right? But if you're going to go take out, $200,000 in student loans to go become a master's in social work to make $30,000 a year or $40,000, you have to take a look at it, because here's what's going to happen, right? Is that you're going to go and you're going to get all that debt. You're going to go work as a social worker. Now you're not going to be happy at that position, right? Because you're not making ends meet, right? And now you got this crippling student loan debt that's stopping you from doing that. So if you're going to go down those roads, right, like look at what your options are, right? Student loan repayments, the military maybe, right? So if that's kind of those paths that you want to go down, figure out how you're gonna make this work ahead of time, right? So when I did my bachelor's in public administration, right, because I thought that management field, I can use management techniques in anything that I do, right, and that has served me well, but I don't know that I'd want to go and do a master's in public administration and get a bunch of more student loans. So student loans and cost of college being where it is, you really, I think, have to be careful, right, with making that investment. Like when you're doing post-secondary, like I'd say, like, do work for a little bit in that field, mm-hmm. and see if it's really what you want, and make sure that that's like your long-term goal, because once you got a bunch of student loans, you're going to more or less be prisoner of it, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, exactly. And my professor had the same conversation with me back in April, because I was thinking of wanting to get my doctorate, because how cool would that be to be Dr. Hawkins? And he was like, got to think about it. I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I think that's a good opportunity for you, but you don't want to, spend X amount of years in college paying all this money, grinding while you're working your other job. Then you get your doctorate and you don't even use it for what you're, trying to do. And he was like, just be mindful of the money that you're going to be putting in if you want to do something like that. So again, it's just one of those things where you just have to really think about it.
Right. Yeah. And oftentimes, it's not just the cost of the education, but also the living expenses and different things associated with that. And then also, the thing a lot of people don't realize is you can't be overqualified for a job, right? So like if the job that you want is a starting teacher, right? Like the school system may or may not hire you, right, for a starting level teacher's position, right, if you're coming in with a doctorate. Because they may say, hey, listen, Ced is just too qualified. He's not going to stick around, so we're gonna invest in somebody that's going to come in and stick with us. So sometimes, especially for teaching, there's some great programs that you can get in to get your master's and whatnot, where the school systems will pay for it, but just be mindful. Just kind of take that long-term view of things. Sometimes we feel like we're running out of time to do things, but life is short, but it's long enough for you to do all those things. So if you really need it, you'll have a chance to go back and do that sort of stuff. You don't need to get it done right now, right, and incur a bunch of... And student loan debts are debilitating, right? They stop people from getting houses, from, living where they want to live, from doing all these kinds of things, right? And so you want to make sure that you're not also being hampered by those choices later on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears from that, you've been practicing law. You've been in this business, in this field for, many years now. What have been some of the many highs? What have been some of the challenges, the lows? And overall, how have you maintained, your motivation in this field?
Right. So, the highs, are whenever we can get a better outcome for the client than the client was expecting, is a high, right? So if we go to trial and we're able to win, certainly that's a high. For me, whenever we're not able to deliver for our clients, it's very, very difficult, and we can't always, unfortunately, we're in a business that some of it is, frankly, out of our control, right? The frustrating part sometimes is when you believe you're right and you just can't convince a judge or jury that to see the case in the way that you want to see it. Overall, though, I think you got to, like I said, you got to keep chugging along. You can't get too high or too low. You just got to kind of keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are a father of three. Right. Overall, how has fatherhood changed your life?
So I think patience is probably like the biggest gain that I've had. Also, just kind of I feel a lot more understanding of, especially people with limited means, and the difficulty and the cost that raising children brings. So. There's a big issue in this country with childcare, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think if we're able to address it, would help a lot of different things. But for me, the biggest thing, like I said, is just kind of relax me a little bit. With kids, it's just like chaos all the time, and you just got to kind of learn to be comfortable with it, because that's the way they learn.
Yeah, I know. I've been working with kids for 3 years now. I think patience is one of the biggest things I've learned also, but I think compassion also, and empathy, because when you think about it, children are like mini adults in a way. With us, we sort of get a chance to walk out if we feel stressed or we feel anxious or if we're frustrated about something. We get the opportunity to just walk out, take a breather. They don't get that opportunity. It's almost like, where do you think you're going? You're not going anywhere. And it's just like, sitting them through and, talking them through whatever, stuff that they're going through, has been able to, teach me how to be more, I think, compassionate and more, I guess, patient with them.
Right. And, I think to me, I agree with all that. But, children, they pick up so much of what they see too, right? So that's the other thing. It's kind of helped me be more mindful of being less hypocritical, because I can say things all the time, right? So I can tell them to put their shoes away all the time, but if I'm leaving my shoes in the living room, not saying that I do. My wife may have a different opinion on that, but but they see that, right, and they emulate that, and that goes for everything. So I think we gotta walk the walk and talk the talk, right, with them, because they pick up on everything, right, down to the way you're feeling, down to the to smallest details. So it's really important, I think, with kids to be honest with them, but also be mindful of how you're doing, how you're feeling, what you mean, because they're picking up on all that stuff, and then you see all that kind of going and affecting other kids too at school. We see that often from kids and what they say to one another. When they say things to one another that a 7-year-old isn't saying to another 7-year-old out of their own mind, right? That they're hearing at home, right? So we got to be mindful of all that too.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. We can always encourage, I guess, the older kids, the big kids, to be, those leaders and set the example for the younger groups. But I think we're the oldest ones, out of everybody. So, like you said, it's important that we set that example too.
Right.
That's another thing I just learned from this right now. It's reminding me also, to carry myself a certain way, the way that I want them to, look at me and perceive me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And as a parent, right, I feel like a lot of parents, and as parents, we always had this thought, right, that I would do anything for my kid, and I would jump in front of a bus for them, right, if it meant saving them, right. And I think as parents, we mean that, right. But also, I see, and I don't take myself out of this equation because I do this sometimes too, but like, sometimes as parents, we are hesitant to do the little things that we know would be very good modeling for our kids, right? Whether it's be exercising or eating right or whatever, right? Like those sorts of things. Sometimes, we model bad behavior for our kids, and you're willing to step in front of the bus, but you're not, willing to make those changes, right? And certainly that, I think all parents struggle with that to some extent. But some say that more is caught than taught, right? So we got to make sure that our kids are catching the right things.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like a funny story. I was at Windy Hill, and we were on the kindergarten playground, and this is at Windy Hill, and they have the brick wall in the area. So I was sitting on the wall, not knowing that I'm not supposed to do that. So other kids are seeing me do that, so they start sitting on the wall. And my coworker's like, "What are you doing? Y'all know you're not supposed to be on that wall. Get down." And one of them goes, 5th grade, "Well, Mr. Cedric's sitting on the wall." And then she's looking at me, and it's like, well, I didn't know. And she said, "See, you got to set the example for them. They see you sitting on the wall, then they're going to sit on the wall." I was like, well, I didn't know we're not supposed to sit on the wall. But that goes to show you how they're looking at me, looking at what I'm doing, and they're gonna mimic that behavior, whether it's good or, of course, bad, sitting on a brick wall.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's so. I think as we take a chance to better ourselves too, right? The kids are gonna see that too, and that, especially with the exercise piece for me. Like I don't exercise nearly enough. I get caught up in all my other things that I'm doing, and I do need to exercise more. But I know the kids see that, right? And that's not good, right? So I think all of us that either have kids or around kids just need to be very, very mindful of what we're doing, what we're saying, the attitudes we're taking, how we're reacting to things, right? I have a young son, and he, if he falls down, if I go up and I'm all worried, then he gets worried, he starts crying. But if I say, "Oh, come on, dude, get back up, you're okay, dust yourself off, go play," he's fine, right? And sometimes the kids pick up on how we're reacting, and they react appropriately too. So you just gotta always be mindful of how that's going down.
Yeah. With the person in your position now at your law firm, do you still have people that you sort of look to for support, or do you have any mentors that sort of guide you and help you along the way?
Always. Oh, I mean, this idea of that, like, people bootstrap and do everything on their own. I don't think it's something that really happens. We all have, people that we look up to, that we learn how to do stuff. I have attorneys that I call, that, other attorneys that run firms, and ask them how to do things. As a candidate for office, I have other candidates or other people I've ran for office before or in office now, to ask them how things are done. That's frankly the way I think you do things the right way. Because, I mean, what's the point of you reinventing the wheel for everything when there are people out there with that knowledge, right? So we got to work smarter, not harder, right? We gotta go draw from the well of knowledge that's out there, right? And frankly, I find that most people, even people that have law firms, for instance, that technically compete with mine, right? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they're more than happy to share information. I am too, right? Because a rising tide's going to lift all boats, right? So we can all do good together, right? And so I think most people have that desire to help others anyways. You just got to give them an opportunity to do so, right? Because people also don't want to be having you feel like you're being judged all the time, right? Like they're giving you advice all the time. So, I that's what I do. I reach out to folks and say, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? How did you hire your first person? How do you do raises? How do you do this? How do you do that? Right? And you kind of get a sense for how others are doing the same sort of work.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that too, in the sense of I don't like asking questions or reaching out for help. Sometimes I try to be a tough guy. I'm like, I can do this on my own. But I ended up burning out. I ended up crashing and burning. So I ended up going for help and reaching out for help. But at that point, I'm at like 0%. So that's something I got to work on and learn also, is that, it's okay to reach out and ask for help or ask for advice on certain things, or how should I go about doing this or doing that, or am I in the wrong in this situation, or are my feelings or thoughts valid?
Right, and Benjamin Franklin, had this method of reaching across the aisle, right, where he would go and he would ask somebody for a gift, right, or not a gift, like to borrow. Let's say I want to borrow can I borrow your book, so that way the other person would feel like they're doing something, right. Like, there are those people in our lives that ask too much all the time, right? You don't want to be one of those people, but like if you think back at the people that you helped, right, that came at you at appropriate times and said, hey, can you help me with this, right? It's fulfilling for you, even as a person, to go and help them, right? So if a buddy of mine is moving, or, my homeowners association the other day, there was a tree, part of the tree branch fell down, a big, thick branch, and they were going to have to spend all this money to cut it down. I said, hey, listen, I'll just go out there with my chainsaw and fix it myself, right? So one way to look at that is that they imposed on me, right, to go and do this. But for me, it was fulfilling to get out there and help my neighborhood and help my, and we sometimes lose sight of that like help for the other person. There's some value also, and some intrinsic value in them helping you get a little bit better, right? They get proud of you, right? Because so then when you succeed, right, like they're gonna be. I mean, I'm sure you see that as an educator, right? Like when one of your kids does something you taught them how to do and they do it really well, I'm sure it gives you some pleasure to see that, man, they whatever it was, right? They couldn't do this and now they can, right? So I think sometimes we think that everyone is like judging us, and it's not. But I feel like people want to help. People want to help, and so I think you give them an opportunity to help you, and you'll be better off, in the long run for doing so.
Yeah, I agree. God calls us to be in fellowship and be in a community, with our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. We're not called to be on islands doing everything by ourselves. Even people in the Bible had, fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who were helping them out and supporting them. So I think it's always good to do that and lean on that.
Right. I mean, Jesus himself, right, had the apostles, right? So, and if you're thinking about anybody that could probably have done it all by himself, would have been Jesus, right? But yet he chose to bring people in, frankly, to help them, right? I think we got to follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. election is coming up in November. I feel like this time is going by so fast. What are the changes, the big changes you're hoping to make in the county? I'm not going to say when you become state attorney. I'm putting it out there. You're going to win.
I really appreciate that. So, and I think, I don't know if Antoine White was the last candidate you had on your show, but he was elected, right? So your track record's pretty good. Our campaign is going to bring three big things, and these are things I really deeply believe in. The first is fairness, right? We have to be fair to everyone, right? Fairness doesn't mean that like everyone agrees with everything that's going on. That means that you recognize that the process of getting there is a fair process, right? You were treated appropriately, you weren't singled out, those sorts of things. Integrity, right? As an Army guy, integrity is always beaten into us. Integrity is doing the right thing, especially when no one's watching, right? And the thing about state's attorney is that, the citizenry isn't able to sit in the courthouses all the time. And when we sit up there and I introduce myself, I say, hey, Rick Piereck on behalf of the state of Maryland, all of us, right? So it's important that we all as citizens know that our state's attorney is acting with integrity at all times, right? That, we've seen some situations recently where, it seems like there's some, favoritism, or some cases aren't being fully prosecuted, and you're having bad outcomes on some cases. And then transparency, right? Transparency is that linchpin to accountability, right? You can't hold a person like the state's attorney accountable if you don't have the data to back up, what you're doing, right? And so one of the things that we want to do is that we want to make data from the state's attorney's office easily accessible online. We want to make sure that we're communicating with folks when there are cases, good, bad, or indifferent, that we are explaining what happened, right? We recently had the situation with the death of a young lady in Darris Beach Road that was killed by an officer who was allegedly off duty. Well, he was off duty, but allegedly driving intoxicated, and he ended up killing the young lady. At the end of the trial, he was, he just got a $600 fine, right? And the state's attorney's office should be communicating with it, because there's a lot of people are upset about that, rightfully, and we've not heard anything really to explain to folks what happened there, right? So transparency is vital. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we are adopting smart on crime strategies, right, where we're using diversionary programs for low-level offenses, but we're being really aggressive. And I want to reiterate that. I want to be very aggressive with folks that are bringing poison into our county. If they're bringing fentanyl, bring heroin into this county, it's going to be gloves off. If you are, violent criminal, we have to, put just as much focus on the sentencing phase of these cases as we do on the trial phase of these cases, right? To make sure that, if you're a danger to the community, that you're being taken out of circulation. But then beyond that, right, we want to make sure that we are improving technology. Calvert is like in the Stone Age of prosecution, modern prosecution tactics, right? And so we want to make sure that we're modernizing the office, we're making it more efficient, we're making it so it's our prosecutors can do a better job in the courtroom presenting cases, right? And we want to improve training for the state's attorney staff, right? Just overall in legal terms, but also like I want to bring training specifically to how to deal with folks with like autism, because they're a whole different population that needs to be treated differently, and frankly acts that may be criminal for a non-autistic person, that may not be criminal for an autistic person, right? Because that may be a way that their condition is expressing itself, right? And so maybe something they need to get help with, but maybe not a criminal act, right? How to deal with domestic violence victims of crime more appropriately. We want to bring all this training in. And then we need to better the relationship between the state's attorney's office and law enforcement, specifically the sheriff's office, right? We need to, I want to have these two offices training together as much as possible. We need to open up lines of communication so that way, frankly, when our sheriff's deputies or state troopers are out there contacting the public, that once again, we want things to be fair, but we don't want just things to be fair and the right thing to be done in the courthouse. We want things to be done fairly and accurately and according to law on Main Street and on Route 4 and on Dares Beach Road and on everywhere, right? So it's really important with that we have really close bonds with the sheriff's office to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And so those are kind of some of the big things that we want to do. I think we can do that. Hopefully, by the time November 8th comes around, but both you said, but also your listeners will be able to cast a vote for us in the November 8th elections.
Yeah, absolutely. I had my paper come in the mail today, so I'm already checking off my people, and you definitely have my vote. I am hoping that those changes can be made in the county, because this county needs to continue to evolve into what it's supposed to be, a safe community where people feel at home and they feel safe when they're in their communities and when they're on the road or when they're out in public. So I'm hoping that with you in office, these changes can be made.
I appreciate you, and I think they can. I think we can make some inroads, and we got some great organizations in Calvert County, right? For instance, the NAACP, Concerned Black Women, Concerned Black Men. We have our churches. We have the Community Neighborhood Watch organization. So there's a number of stakeholders out there that have a big interest in doing better for our county. And I think if we work together, we work in unison with these other organizations, we can have both a community that's safer, but one that everybody feels safe, right? Because as I walk around and I talk to folks, there's a group of folks that feel very, very safe, and then there's a group of folks that just don't feel like Calvert is a welcoming place for them anymore, right? Folks that are moving out of the county. And so we want to make sure that that everyone feels like they have a place here in Calvert County. And that's what we're going to do here after November.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a really great conversation with you. Got 2 more questions for you, sure, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But if you could offer a piece of advice to a young version of yourself, let's say in high school, what would you say to that young Rick Piereck?
I would say that, to cherish the moment that you're in right now. Right, because that version of you is only there for that time, right? And I know that sounds really, really corny and nebulous, but the Rick that was Staff Sergeant Rick Piereck back in the day, I can never go back to being that guy, right, and experiencing those things. But for me, I was always the go-getter, right? That was always my thing, right? I was always kind of what was on the horizon next. So just be more present. You asked about kids. That's the other thing, right? With kids, you have to be present with kids, because the kid that's here now, next year is going to be a different kid, right? They grow up and they change. And so just kind of be present for the things that you're gonna do, and then just keep moving forward, because when you're moving forward, but you're appreciating the ride while you're doing it, you're really getting the most out of that ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my final question to you before we go ahead and wrap up is, when it's all said and done, what would you like your legacy to be? Right.
So, I'd like my legacy to be one that I really cared about other people. I really care about other people. I want everyone to succeed, and I want to be known as that guy that you could count on, right? You could count on Rick to come and give you the shirt off his back, right? One of the things, we talked about my father passed in 2015. One of the things that surprised me is when we showed up to his funeral, and all these people who I didn't know, people flew in from all over the globe, right, to come participate in that. And that was something to see, because he really cared. And the things that he did and the things he gave his time to, were really important to him. And I don't think we really quite understood it when he was around, but seeing all that and seeing the pictures of all the kids that he impacted, that's who I want to be, man. I want to be somebody who was, who made an impact in the community, made the community a little bit better than it was, when, before he got there. Right. And so that's kind of, that's who I want to be. That's the impact I want to have.
Nice. My mentor and professor I had, Dr. Edward Newsom, I had him on the podcast in January. One of the things he taught me recently was just about like your purpose in this world. And he was just like, your purpose is much bigger than yourself. Your purpose is how you impact people and how you use the skills and talents that God blessed you to enrich their lives and help promote them and get them to the next level. So I think that's what I'd like my legacy to be, to be able to use the purpose that God instilled in me to help bring out the positive qualities in, the lives of others. And if I can know that I impacted the life of, one person before I go out of this world, then I know, that I achieved my purpose and what God wanted me to do.
Right. Well, as somebody whose kids you've worked with, I can tell you've already impacted a couple lives. So I think you just keep moving in that direction. I think you're doing great work, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. And I wish you luck with your future endeavors.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, and good luck with your race. I hope to have you back on in November, and we can have a victory party.
Yes, sir. let's put that on the calendar.
Yes, sir. This wraps up the podcast. Stay blessed and stay encouraged.